Jalen's heart pounded as the squad car pulled up beside him. It was a sunny afternoon in the quiet suburb of Mayfield, where the neighborhood was peaceful. Too peaceful for what was about to happen. He had just finished his shift at the local deli and was walking to the bus stop, earbuds in, when the flashing lights tore through the calm. The engine rumbled, cutting to the hum of his music. "Hey, kid, you. Come here." Officer Turner barked from the window, his face grim and unreadable. Jalen hesitated, his throat tightening. The officer's eyes narrowed with suspicion, as if Jalen's very presence threatened to order the street. Jalen pulled his earbuds out slowly, confused. "What did I do, officer?" he asked, but the words felt weak, rehearsed. He had learned not to make waves. "You don't belong here," Turner sneered, hand hovering near his belt. Jalen's stomach churned. He had been living here his whole life. He was a senior in high school, not some wandering troublemaker. But something about Turner's gaze was cold and accusatory, like the officer was already counting him guilty before he had even spoken. "You should go back where you came from," Turner muttered, his voice thick with malice. The words hit Jalen like a slap, hard and loud in the silence between them. Jalen's mind raced as the officer moved closer, his hand finally brushing his waist. It felt like the start of something bigger, something he couldn't stop. Then the faintest click echoed in the air. His phone was recording. Jalen's fingers trembled, but his resolve stiffened. If this was going to go down, he would make sure the world saw it. The world would know the truth. Chapter outline. Chapter 1. A moment of fierce summary. Jalen, a black teen, faces racial profiling while walking home. He's stopped by Officer Turner, who accuses him without cause. The interaction quickly escalates, and Jalen begins recording the encounter on his phone. Sensing something is wrong, his fear of what might happen is tangible, but he decides to take a stand. His phone captures every word, every action. The sun was hanging low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow on the sidewalks of Mayfield. The air was heavy, cloying with the heat of a late afternoon in late summer. Jalen adjusted his backpack and kept his head down as he walked down the familiar street toward the bus stop. He had just finished his shift at the deli, his muscles aching from hours of lifting, slicing, and wrapping. A low hum of the city's usual noise filled his ears, his earbuds in, music blaring to drown out the world around him. He liked it like that, quiet, detached, just another day. He was used to it, used to everything. That was until the squad car rolled up. The familiar siren light sliced through his music, a harsh sting in the calm. Jalen's heart skipped a beat, his fingers twitching as he instinctively pulled the earbuds from his ears, his body going tense. He glanced over his shoulder, his breath catching when he saw the officer's face, a hard, impassive mask. Officer Turner. His gaze locked onto Jalen. The weight of it was suffocating, like a premonition of something ugly about to happen. "Hey, kid, you, come here," Turner ordered, the sound of his voice grating through the air. Jalen's throat tightened. His palms started to sweat. "What did I do now?" "Excuse me?" Jalen asked, confusion tinging his voice as he slowly turned to face the officer. "You heard me," Turner snapped, his eyes narrowing. The officer's tone was harsh, almost mocking. "Come over here." Jalen hesitated, his feet rooted to the pavement. This wasn't right. He hadn't done anything wrong. His chest constricted, his mind scrambling for the right words to respond. But there were no words that would matter. The officer was already judging him, had already made up his mind about him. "Why are you stopping me?" Jalen asked, his voice strained, though the question felt hollow even to him. He had asked this before, as a kid, as a teenager, as someone who had always been watched, always been othered, but it never got easier. Turner didn't answer. Instead, he leaned out his car window, his hand brushing the gun on his belt. The gesture was casual, too casual. It was a power move, one that Jalen knew too well. "You don't belong here," Turner sneered, his lips curling into something akin to a smirk. "You should go back where you came from." The words hit Jalen like a slap across the face. He froze, the sting spreading across his chest. Back where I came from. He'd been born in this city. He'd gone to school here, worked here, lived here. His entire life had been here. Yet this officer, this man who didn't know him, had decided he didn't belong, that he was a threat. Jalen opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He stood there, mouth agape, eyes wide, as his heart pounded in his chest. What do I do now? His fingers brushed his phone in his pocket. A brief flash of thought, a fleeting instinct. Record it. This time, record it. The phone was already in his hand before he realized it. He fumbled with it, opening the camera app, his hands trembling. He switched the camera to video and turned it toward the officer. The sound of the officer's breath, now the loudest thing in the world. The officer's hand hovered closer to his gun. Jalen could feel the tension rising, the simmering heat between them. Turner's eyes flicked down, noticing the phone, and his posture stiffened. "You think you're going to record me?" Turner's voice was low, a warning growl that sent a shiver down Jalen's spine. "You better think again, kid." The words weren't a threat. They were a declaration of power. It wasn't a question of whether Jalen would be allowed to record. It was a question of whether he'd survive what came next. But Jalen wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after all the years of being silenced, of seeing the same thing happen over and over again with no justice. This time, he was going to expose it. The phone was still recording. The world was watching. Then Jalen's thumb hovered over the stop button. The officer's hand reached out toward him. A chill ran through his spine. Jalen didn't stop recording. Jalen's fingers shook as he held the phone steady, his thumb barely grazing the button to stop the recording. The world felt surreal, the loud buzz of the air around him, the steady beat of his heart in his ears, and the officer's heavy, looming presence as he stepped closer. The street, once familiar and calming, now seemed a dangerous place, teetering on the edge of something awful. "You're really doing this, huh?" Officer Turner said, his voice low but tight with anger. His hand was still hovering by his belt, fingers twitching near his sidearm. Jalen's eyes flicked to it, then back up to Turner's face. His pulse raced, but his hand didn't waver. "Yeah, I am," Jalen replied, his voice barely above a whisper, but firm. He had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable, and yet a small ember of defiance flickered in his chest. He wasn't going to let this officer intimidate him. Not this time. Turner sneered, stepping closer, his shadow swallowing Jalen whole. "You know how this works, right?" he muttered, his voice thick with contempt. "You talk back to me, and it's your word against mine, and we both know who people will believe." He turned his head, nodding to the two other officers who had just arrived at the scene. They didn't even look at Jalen. Their eyes remained fixed on the ground, avoiding any sort of contact. No one wanted to make a move. No one wanted to stand up for what was right. Jalen could feel it, the heavy silence that wrapped around the three officers. It was like they were all complicit, all waiting for one of them to make a move, to tip the scales in their favor. "Is there a problem, Officer Turner?" one of the other officers asked, his tone distant, uninterested. He didn't even bother to look at Jalen, as though he didn't even exist. "Not yet," Turner responded sharply. His gaze was fixed on Jalen, and Jalen could feel it, the hate, the disdain that rolled off him in waves. "But I'm about to make a problem." Jalen's stomach twisted. He had faced discrimination before, but something about this felt different. This felt personal. Turner wasn't just harassing him because he was black. It was clear now that there was more to it. Jalen had seen this officer around town, often patrolling the streets with that same arrogance. He was a part of the system, a cog that turned, perpetuating the same cycle of fear and anger. "Listen, I didn't do anything," Jalen said, his voice shaking slightly but gaining strength with each word. "I'm just walking home." "I said come here, didn't I?" Turner barked, his hand now visibly resting on his belt, just above the handle of his gun. The threat was real, and Jalen could feel the weight of it bearing down on him. Jalen swallowed hard, glancing around. There were people standing nearby, watching, but no one moved. No one said anything. A few glanced at their phones, pretending not to notice. The world kept moving, but Jalen felt as though time had stopped. The officers didn't speak up, not a single one of them, and the silence became suffocating. The bystanders shifted uncomfortably, glancing away. No one was willing to intervene. No one was willing to speak up for Jalen. And why would they? They had seen this happen time and time again. Black kids getting harassed, questioned, even arrested, and nothing ever changed. But something inside Jalen cracked. No more silence. His thumb hovered over the button to stop the recording. His chest tightened, his palms sweating. He'd made it this far. He couldn't let fear take over now. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on," Jalen said, his voice unwavering. The words hung in the air, louder than any gunshot. For a moment, the officer's expression faltered. It was small, a flicker of uncertainty, but it was enough. Turner took a step back, his gaze narrowing as he weighed Jalen's challenge. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, the only sound the hum of the police cruiser's engine. Then Turner snorted, a derisive sound that cut through the tension. "You think you're a hero or something?" he spat. "I'm not trying to be a hero," Jalen said quietly, his hand still shaking. "I'm just trying to stay alive." A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't just a fear of what could happen here, in the open, with the camera rolling. It was a recognition that this moment could cost him everything. But somehow, the thought of just walking away, of letting it slide like all the other times, that was far worse. For a brief second, Turner stood still, almost contemplative. But then, with a flick of his wrist, he turned on his heel and walked back to the squad car. "Get out of here," Turner muttered, his voice tinged with disgust. Jalen stayed where he was, still holding the phone in his hand. He watched the officer get back into the car, watched him drive away. But his heartbeat didn't slow. The officers hadn't arrested him. They hadn't touched him. But they hadn't apologized either. The damage had been done. The video was still rolling. Jalen stopped the recording. The evening was thick with the scent of impending rain. But the storm that weighed heavily on Jalen's chest wasn't the one the clouds promised. It was the burden of what had just happened. The moment he had allowed himself to believe that this time, something might change. But as he made his way home, his mind replayed the scene again and again, over and over, like a broken record. His phone buzzed in his pocket, dragging him out of the storm in his mind. He pulled it out, his thumb hovering over the screen as he saw the barrage of notifications. Messages, comments, tags. The video, it had gone viral. His heart skipped. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected the flood of comments. Not like this. His stomach twisted as he scrolled through, trying to brace himself for what he would see. Some of the comments were supportive, even encouraging. Some said finally, some called him a hero. But there were others, darker ones that made his chest tighten, made him wonder this fight had been worth it all. "You're just trying to start trouble. Where are your parents? You've been raised to act like this. Should have kept your mouth shut." The words blurred together, but the sting of them was sharp. His jaw clenched, and for a moment he thought about deleting the video, wiping it all away. But then his thumb moved back to the screen, not to delete, but to pause and then read again. This was bigger than him now. "Focus," he muttered to himself, staring at his reflection in the bus window. His mind drifted back to the moment he had walked home, still feeling the weight of Officer Turner's sneer. He couldn't stop replaying the officer's words. "You don't belong here." They stuck in his mind like shards of glass, cutting deeper each time. They weren't just words. They were a command to retreat, to disappear, to make himself small. But he wasn't going to shrink anymore. Later that evening, Jalen sat in the cramped living room of his apartment, staring at his phone. His mom was cooking dinner in the small kitchen, the scent of rice and beans wafting through the air. But Jalen wasn't hungry. Not tonight. He couldn't think about food. Couldn't think about anything except what had just happened. The phone buzzed again, and Jalen's stomach sank when he saw the notification. Mayfield Police Department. His mom walked into the living room with a plate of food, noticing the troubled look on his face. She sat down beside him, her expression softening when she saw the phone in his hand. "You still go ahead with that video, huh?" she asked, her tone gentle but knowing. She wiped her hands on her apron, sitting down next to him. Jalen didn't respond right away. The words caught in his throat, and his fingers gripped the phone so tightly it almost slipped out his hands. "Mom," Turner was looking at me like I was nothing. I mean, like I wasn't even human. His voice cracked, the words heavier than he expected. "But I thought maybe if people saw it, Something would happen. Something good would happen. His mother sighed, sitting back in her chair. Baby, you've got to understand something about this world. People can see injustice. They can even know it's wrong. But that doesn't mean they'll stand up for you. That doesn't mean they'll do the right thing. She reached out, placing a hand on his. I want you to understand something. We've been fighting these battles for generations. Your grandfather fought them, and so did my father. And you'll fight them too. But it's not always going to be easy. Jalen looked up at his mom, his face hardening. So what? We just let slide? Like we always do? Like they want us to? I'm not doing that, Mom. I can't. I won't. She looked at him, her eyes soft but filled with a quiet strength. I never said to let it slide, Jalen. But I'm telling you this. It's not going to be easy. You have to be ready for the fallout. Jalen leaned forward, his eyes never leaving his phone. I'm ready. I'm ready for whatever comes next. The next day, the fallout arrived faster than he expected. At school, things were different. The air around him felt thick, heavy, like everyone knew something was coming. Some kids avoided his gaze. Others stared at him with suspicion. He felt it immediately. The divide, the unspoken line that was drawn between him and everyone else. He sat down at his usual lunch table, but there was a coldness in the air. His friends, who usually sat around him, were whispering to one another, their voices low and filled with hesitation. He could hear their murmurs, but when he looked up, they quickly fell silent. They couldn't look him in the eye. What's going on? Jalen asked, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence. One of his friends, Marcus, hesitated. Man, you're causing a lot of drama with that video. He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. People are talking. You're making people uncomfortable. Jalen felt the words hit, like a punch in the gut. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. He was on the edge of losing it. The anger, the frustration, the exhaustion all bubbled up inside him, but he swallowed it down. He wasn't going to let them see him break. Not now. Let me get this straight, Jalen said slowly, his voice controlled. You're telling me that the problem isn't the cop who treated me like garbage, it's me? For standing up to it? Marcus didn't respond. He shifted uncomfortably, then muttered, I'm not saying that, Jalen, but maybe this isn't the way to handle it. You don't know what's going to happen. This is bigger than you. You could be putting yourself in danger. Jalen's eyes hardened. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair as he did. He didn't look back at Marcus or anyone else. He walked out of the cafeteria, his footsteps echoing in the silence behind him. They just don't get it, Jalen thought, clenching his fists. They never will. Later that day, the school principal called him into her office. Mrs. Johnson, a middle-aged woman who had always been cordial, didn't smile when he entered. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Jalen stood there, his hands at his sides, unsure what was coming. Jalen, I'm sure you know why you're here, Mrs. Johnson said, her tone clinical. She glanced at the screen on her desk, then back at him. We've received several complaints about the video you posted. The school board believes it's causing disruption. Jalen crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. I'm not going to take it down. Jalen, Mrs. Johnson began, her voice soft but firm. I understand what you're going through, but you have to consider the bigger picture here. This isn't just about one officer. This is about maintaining order, about keeping peace in the school. The bigger picture? Jalen's voice cracked. The bigger picture is that kids like me get harassed by people like Turner every day, and no one does anything about it. This is the only way I can get anyone to listen. She sighed. You're making a mistake, Jalen. You're putting yourself in the line of fire, and I don't want to see you hurt. I'm not scared of them. Jalen shot back, his voice cold. Good, but you need to be careful, son. This isn't just a fight for justice. It's a fight for survival. Jalen stood there, silent, before turning to walk out her office. But as he opened the door, he heard her voice one last time. I hope you know what you're doing. Jalen didn't turn back. He knew what he was doing. He was trying to make sure his voice was heard. And if it cost him everything, so be it. Jalen walked out of the principal's office, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, The weight of Mrs. Johnson's words settled heavily on his shoulders. "You're making a mistake." She had said it softly, almost like a warning, but he didn't feel like he had a choice. His phone buzzed again, pulling him out of his thoughts. He pulled it from his pocket, dread pooling in his stomach as he read the notification. Mayfield Police Department. The screen flickered, revealing the details of a message from the same department that had already tried to intimidate him. "Jalen," the message began, "we are conducting an investigation into the video you posted. Please be advised that any further distribution of this footage may result in legal action." Jalen's fingers trembled, but he gritted his teeth and slammed the phone back into his pocket. He had expected retaliation, sure, but seeing it so plainly, so directly, shook him to his core. The weight of what he was up against was only just beginning to sink in. They weren't going to let him get away with this. He had pushed too hard, exposed too much, but there was no turning back now. That evening, the atmosphere at home was heavy. His mom had already heard about the message from the school. They had sat down for dinner, but the conversation had been strained. She could tell Jalen was upset, but he hadn't said anything. She'd spent the last few months trying to protect him, trying to keep him safe from the world she knew was full of danger, but now it seemed like the world had come to his doorstep. "You need to be careful, Jalen," she said after a long silence, her voice almost pleading. "This is bigger than you think. The police, the school, they're all connected. They have power. You can't fight them all at once." Jalen's hands tightened around his fork, but he didn't look up. He hadn't eaten much since the video went up, but now he felt the knot in his stomach twist tighter. He didn't want to think about it. He didn't want to hear his mom's warnings. They felt like they were pushing him back into the shadows. "I'm not going to back down," Jalen said, his voice low but firm. "If I do, nothing changes. We're just going to keep getting harassed, keep getting pushed around. I've got to show them it's not okay. People are starting to pay attention. Mom, we're not invisible anymore." His mom stared at him, her eyes filled with an unspoken mix of fear and pride. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped herself. She had seen this defiance before in her father, in her grandfather. They had all fought against the system, and it had cost them something. She knew Jalen had that fire inside him, but she also knew what happened to people who dare to challenge the powers that be. "I'm proud of you, Jalen," she said, her voice softening, "but you need to be prepared. This fight, it takes more than courage. It takes strategy." Jalen didn't answer. He couldn't. His heart was still pounding from everything that had happened that day, and the fear gnawing at him was too raw, too close to the surface. But there was no going back now. He had made his decision. The next day, Jalen arrived at school to find things had already started to change. Whispers followed him down the hall. Eyes followed his every move. He could feel the tension in the air, thicker than ever before. People who used to greet him with smiles now turned their heads when he passed. The silent judgment was deafening. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a notification from the police or school. It was a text from his best friend, Marcus. "Yo, I saw the video. I get what you're doing, but you've got to stop. This is too much. People are talking. You're putting us all in danger." Jalen's fingers hovered over the screen, the words sinking in deeper than he expected. He had known it would be hard, but this felt like betrayal. Marcus was supposed to be his ally, his friend. He had been by his side through everything, but now he was asking him to back down. Jalen's thumb hovered over the reply button, but no words came. What could he say? That the world didn't understand? That no one would understand until it was too late? Instead, he pocketed the phone and kept walking to his first class, forcing himself not to react. He couldn't show weakness now. The damage was already done. At lunch, he was met with an icy reception. Marcus was sitting with a group of people he barely recognized, laughing too loudly, making too much noise to cover the awkwardness that had settled in the space between them. "Jalen," Marcus called out when he saw him approach, but his tone was strained, forced. Jalen didn't want to sit with them. He didn't want to pretend like everything was fine, but he knew he couldn't avoid them forever. He sat down at the edge of the table, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled his tray closer. "Man, you've got to take that video down," Marcus said quietly, leaning in so no one else could hear. "This is going too far. I know you're trying to make a point, but you're putting yourself in a bad spot. The cops already know who you are. You're just asking for trouble." Jalen's eyes flicked to his friend's face, the fear clearly written there. Marcus wasn't just worried about Jalen. He was worried about what the video was doing to their whole community. He was scared, and it showed. "I'm not backing down," Jalen said firmly, his voice rising slightly. "They can't silence me. I'm not the problem here. They are." He motioned vaguely to the school, to the people around them, to the world that already decided he was guilty before he'd even had a chance to prove his innocence. People need to see it. They need to know what's happening. Marcus opened his mouth to say something, but hesitated. "Jalen, don't be naive. You can't fight this alone. You're making a target out of yourself. Out of all of us." Jalen leaned back in his seat, staring at the table. "Then I guess I'll be the target," he muttered under his breath. After lunch, Jalen received another text, but this one was different. It was a message from a local journalist, someone he didn't know personally, but who had apparently been following the video. "Jalen, I saw the footage. I want to help. I can get you in touch with the right people, people who can expose the corruption in Mayfield's police department. You've got a real shot here. Let's talk." Jalen's heart raced. This was it. This was his chance to make a real difference. But as the weight of what he had started began to settle on him, he felt a flicker of doubt. Was he ready for this? Would it cost him everything? There was no turning back now. The next few days passed in a blur, the tension at school building like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Jalen couldn't escape the whispers or the looks from his classmates. It was as if the entire world was waiting for him to crack, to apologize, to delete the video, to back down. But every time he thought about it, the image of Officer Turner's sneer flashed in his mind, and his resolve hardened. He wasn't going to be quiet anymore. Not this time. The text from the journalist had opened a door he hadn't even known was there. That evening, he met with Sarah Mitchell, a local investigative reporter who had been following the story. She was sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, someone who had built a reputation for digging into the darker corners of the city, exposing things people didn't want to be exposed. She had already done her homework, watching the video and reaching out to Jalen with an offer he couldn't refuse. "Jalen, you're not just fighting for yourself anymore," Sarah said, her voice steady as they sat across from each other at a small coffee shop. She was already getting to the heart of it, her expression focused. "You got the chance to bring down something much bigger than a single officer. This could be the moment where everything changes for Mayfield." Her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. He wasn't ready to think that big. Not yet. All he wanted was justice. For the way he was treated. For how Turner had looked at him like he was nothing. But Sarah's words planted a seed. "You've seen the patterns, Jalen," Sarah continued. "Turner isn't an isolated incident. He's part of a system that has been hurting people like you for years. We can expose that." She leaned forward, her gaze intent on his. "But we can't do it halfway. We need more than just your video. We need the story, the whole story. I've got connections, but we'll need to take it to the next level." Jalen swallowed, his mouth dry, the weight of her words pressed down on him. But it wasn't fear he felt now. It was something else, something sharper, something that made his hands clench into fists under the table. This was it. This was his shot. "I'm in," he said, his voice firm. The next morning, Jalen's phone rang just as he was getting ready for school. It was a blocked number. He hesitated before answering. He had learned to be cautious with unfamiliar calls, especially since everything with the video had blown up. "Hello, Jalen. This is Officer Turner. We need to talk." The voice on the other end was cold, familiar. Jalen's stomach dropped and his breath caught. The officer's voice was like a slap to his chest. "About what?" Jalen replied, try to keep his voice steady, though it felt as if the ground was shaking beneath him. "I know what you're doing," Turner said, his tone dripping with venom. "You think you can make a fool out of me, but it's not going to happen. This is your last chance to take that video down. If you don't, I'll make sure things go very badly for you, for your family too." Jalen's blood ran cold, but he didn't back down. "What are you threatening me with? You're the one who started all of this." Turner chuckled, a cruel sound. "Don't think I don't know how this works. I have connections. I can make your life miserable, and I'll make sure the people who support you get caught in the crossfire. Jalen's fingers curl around his phone, his anger flaring. He felt the threat in Turner's words, but something inside him snapped. You're the one who's corrupt, not me. You don't get to intimidate me anymore. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Jalen held his breath, waiting for the next words to come. Then, Turner's voice dropped even lower. You have no idea who you're messing with, kid, he said, almost whispering. You think this is just about you? You've got no idea what happens when you take on the system. You'll see soon enough. The line went dead. Jalen's hands were shaking when he ended the call. He dropped the phone onto his bed, staring at it for a moment. A sick feeling twisted in his stomach. Turner's words felt like a warning, a promise of retaliation that might be more than just words. But Jalen wasn't afraid. He couldn't afford to be. The fear, the threats, they weren't going to stop him. They only made him more determined. He had seen enough to know the system was broken. He had to keep fighting, even if it cost him everything. When Jalen got to school, it was worse than he expected. It wasn't just the usual whispers anymore. The tension had escalated. There were more stares, more muttered conversations as he walked through the halls. His classmates avoided him. It was clear now. The video had made him a target, not just from the police, but from everyone who didn't want to face the truth. The worst part was that even his friends had started to pull away. Marcus was distant, avoiding eye contact whenever Jalen tried to talk to him. He was starting to see the lines drawn, the subtle pressures that had always been there, the ones that kept people like him from fighting back. But Marcus wasn't the only one who was backing away. Even the teachers seemed to look at him differently. It was like he had suddenly become a symbol, and no one knew what to do with it. Jalen's heart weighed heavy in his chest as he sat down in his first period class. As he opened his notebook, he noticed something, a small note folded up and tucked into the middle of the pages. He unfolded it slowly, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. It read, I believe you, but you're playing with fire. Be careful. There was no name, no signature, just the words. Jalen's fingers ran over the note. He knew it was from someone who saw the truth, someone who knew the stakes, but he couldn't tell who. It didn't matter. The message was clear. He wasn't alone. After school, Jalen met up with Sarah Mitchell again. They sat in a small park just outside town, away from the prying eyes of his classmates. Sarah was already there, her laptop open, the screen filled with reports and documents. She'd been working in the background, gathering information, ready to bring Turner down. Jalen, this is it, she said, her eyes glinting with determination. We've got what we need. The police reports, internal documents. We got a pattern of corruption, misconduct. Turner's not just one bad apple. He's a symptom of a much bigger issue. But we need to go public, and we need to do it fast. Jalen nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment. He could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him, but he wasn't backing away anymore. He wasn't afraid of Turner. He wasn't afraid of what came next. We'll take them down, Jalen said quietly, his voice steady. We'll take them all down. The following days felt like they were moving in slow motion. Jalen didn't know what was worse, the weight of everything building on his shoulders, or the lingering silence from his classmates, his friends, and even some of his family. It was like he had stepped into a role he hadn't chosen, one he couldn't escape from. Everyone around him was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Everywhere Jalen went, the whispers followed him. There were the usual glances, but now there was something colder in the air. The students who used to nod at him in the hallways now crossed the street to avoid him. Teachers who had always been polite and courteous began to act like he didn't exist. It was as if he had become a pariah in his own school. But no matter how hard they tried to ignore him, Jalen couldn't ignore what was happening, what he was trying to change. The video he had posted had taken on a life of its own. It had spread across social media like wildfire, with millions of views, hashtags, and news stories. Jalen's phone had been flooded with messages, some from people he didn't know, others from people who barely knew him but suddenly felt the need to weigh in. Some offered their support, others were full of hate. But the most unsettling messages came from those who claimed they knew someone who knew someone inside the department, People who hinted at the true extent of corruption, that Turner wasn't the only officer involved in illegal activities, that the rot went deeper, spread farther, and it was up to Jalen to expose it. That was why, later that afternoon, Sarah Mitchell called him again. "Jalen," Sarah's voice crackled through the phone, tense and urgent. "I've got something for you. It's big." Jalen's heart skipped. "What is it?" "I've been digging into Turner's past," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And I found something I think you should see." Jalen stood up from his bed, pacing the room. "What is it? What's going on?" Sarah took a deep breath before speaking again, and this time her voice was cautious. "I found evidence that connects Turner to several other incidents. Not just here in Mayfield, all over the state. He's been involved in multiple cover-ups. There are people, victims, witnesses, who've been silenced, and they've all been swept under the rug. But it's not just Turner. The corruption runs deeper than that. Much deeper." Jalen felt his breath catch in his throat. He stopped pacing and leaned against his window, staring out at the sky, but all he could see was the looming darkness of everything he'd uncovered. "How deep are we talking here?" he asked, his voice steady but hollow. "I'm talking about police reports being doctored, false accusations, wrongful arrests, people being forced to drop cases. There are names of people who've been paid off or threatened. The mayor's office is involved. And even more alarming, there's a long history of this. It's not just a recent thing. It's been going on for decades, Jalen." Jalen's mind spun. He felt like the walls were closing in on him. It was more than just one corrupt officer. It was a system, one that had been running unchecked for so long that it had grown its own web of lies and manipulation. And now it was all in his hands. "What do we do with this?" Jalen asked, his voice quiet, unsure if he was even ready for what this meant. "We go public," Sarah replied, no hesitation in her tone. "We take everything we've found to the press. But we need to be careful, Jalen. The people behind this will stop at nothing to protect themselves. They won't let the truth get out without a fight." "I'm not scared," Jalen said, his voice firmer than he felt. "Let's do it." The next day, Jalen skipped school. He wasn't hiding, though. He was meeting Sarah at the office of a local news station. The plan was simple: to turn over all the information Sarah had uncovered, everything Jalen had recorded, and the video that had sparked it all. When Jalen walked into the station's lobby, he was met by a reporter named Emily Chase, who had worked with Sarah on similar cases. Emily was in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed and professional, wearing a black blazer over a white blouse. She didn't waste any time. "You must be Jalen," Emily said, extending her hand with a tight smile. "I've seen your video. It's not just brave. It's a game changer. The kind of thing that doesn't come around often." Jalen shook her hand, but couldn't help feeling like a part of him was already drowning in the weight of what was about to happen. "You sure about this?" "I don't know what will happen after we release it. People might be coming for me." Emily nodded, her face hardening with determination. "We've been waiting for something like this. Your video is the key to everything. Turner is just the tip of the iceberg. What you got will change everything, not just for you, but for everyone who's been suffering under this system." The room felt smaller than it actually was. Jalen stood there, staring at the file on the desk that held all the evidence: police reports, witness statements, internal communications. Everything Sarah had uncovered. Everything that could bring down the entire system. Emily looked at him, her expression softened. "You're doing the right thing, Jalen. We'll protect you. But you need to understand, this isn't just about exposing Turner. It's about holding the entire system accountable. You've started something, and there's no turning back." Jalen's stomach twisted, but he stood tall. "I'm ready. It's time for them to face the consequences." That night, the video was broadcast. It wasn't just a local news story anymore. It hit national headlines. The world was watching as the footage of Jalen's encounter with Officer Turner made its rounds on television, social media, and news outlets. But as the cameras focused on Turner, it wasn't just his face that was revealed. The corruption, the lies, the cover-ups, they all came into the light. Jalen felt the weight of it all, but there was no turning back now. He had stepped into the fight for truth, and he wasn't going to walk away. He knew this was just the beginning. The aftermath of the video's release was nothing short of chaotic. Within hours of it hitting the airwaves, the story exploded into every corner of the country. Jalen's face, his voice, his stand against injustice were everywhere. News outlets debated the legitimacy of his claims. Social media erupted with debates on whether he was a hero or a troublemaker. But through it all, Jalen felt the same weight on his chest, a constant pressure, a reminder of what he had done, what he had started. The police, of course, denied everything. The mayor's office issued a statement expressing concern over the video and the allegations, but claimed that the accusations were premature and unsubstantiated. But the more they tried to distance themselves, the more the public demanded answers. And the more they tried to bury the truth, the more people started digging. Sarah had been right about one thing. It wasn't just Officer Turner. It was the entire system, the decades of corruption, the cover-ups, the unchecked abuse of power. And Jalen had just exposed it all. But as the pressure mounted, so did the risks. Threats began flooding in, some anonymous, others less subtle. The police weren't just going to let it go. The powerful figures who had benefited from the system of oppression weren't about to let one teenager tear it down without a fight. It was late one evening when Jalen received a message that would change everything. He had just gotten back from meeting with Sarah again when his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, one that sent a chill through his body. "You've made a huge mistake. You don't understand the danger you're in. Stop now, and things can still go back to normal. But if you keep pushing, you won't like the consequences." His hand shook as he held the phone. Jalen sat down on his bed, staring at the message. Who was this? The threat was unmistakable. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. The powers behind the system were coming for him. And it wasn't just about Turner anymore. They were going to destroy him if they had to. Jalen swallowed hard, the fear gnawing at his gut. But then the thought of backing down, of letting them win, made him feel sick. He had already lost so much. There's no going back. He thought, I have to keep going. He tapped out a response. I'm not stopping. You can't silence me. He hit send, and for the first time in days, his hand stopped trembling. He had made his decision. Now, it was just a matter of surviving what came next. The next morning, Jalen woke up to a flurry of news alerts. Officer Turner had been placed on administrative leave, and an internal investigation had begun into the accusations of misconduct. It was a small victory, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like a delay, a temporary halt to a much larger battle. Turner was still out there. The system was still in place, and now Jalen was in their sights. At school, the atmosphere had shifted once again. The whispers had turned into open stares, some full of judgment, others full of fear. Jalen had become the epicenter of the storm. There was no hiding from it anymore. He could feel the eyes on him, the weight of their expectations, the pressure from every direction. And then there was Marcus. His best friend had been silent for days, avoiding him at every turn. Marcus had been distant ever since the video went up. Jalen hadn't heard from him, not even a word of support. But that morning, as Jalen walked through the crowded hallways, he saw him, Marcus, standing at the far end of the hallway, waiting for him. Jalen's heart sank as he approached, his steps slow and heavy. When he reached Marcus, his friend looked at him, his expression unreadable. "You've been avoiding me," Jalen said, his voice hard but unsure. Marcus hesitated, glancing around before lowering his voice. "I don't know what to say, man. This whole thing, it's bigger than we thought. People are getting scared. I'm getting scared." Jalen clenched his jaw. "You think I'm scared? They want to shut me up, but I'm not going down without a fight. I can't back down now." "I know," Marcus said quietly, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and something else, something Jalen couldn't quite place. "But we can't just keep going like this. The cops, the school, they're all coming for you. They won't stop until you're destroyed." Jalen stood tall, staring at his friend. "They already tried that. It didn't work. So no, I'm not stopping. You don't have to help, Marcus, but I'm doing this, not just for me, but for everyone who's been ignored." The words hung in the air for a moment, thick with the truth. Then Marcus, after what felt like an eternity of hesitation, nodded. I'll stand by you, Jalen. But I'm scared. We all are. We're all scared, Jalen said, his voice softening for the first time. But that doesn't mean we stay quiet. Later that day, as Jalen was walking to his last class, he felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Sarah. Jalen, we need to talk, she said urgently, glancing over her shoulder as though she feared someone might be listening. Jalen raised an eyebrow, following her to a secluded corner of the school's courtyard. What's going on? The story is about to break wide open. We've got more evidence, documents that can tie Turner to multiple cover-ups and even criminal activity. Sarah looked at him with a new fire in her eyes. But we need to act fast. Once this gets out, there will be no turning back. Jalen's heart raced as the full weight of their next move hit him. He was standing on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything. The world was watching, but it was no longer just about the video. It was about justice, about exposing the truth, and about holding those in power accountable. We're doing this, Jalen said, his voice steady. This is the moment we fight for. The showdown was coming, and Jalen was ready to face whatever consequences lay ahead, ready to expose the corruption, even if it meant putting everything he had left on the line. Because sometimes the fight for justice was bigger than any one person. The storm Jalen had been bracing for finally broke. It was as if the entire world had held its breath for too long, and now, with one final push, the truth came rushing out. What started with one video had now turned into an avalanche. His phone buzzed constantly, calls, texts, messages. News outlets scrambled for interviews. Local protests began to form, and the story spread nationwide. His name was on the lips of everyone, from the average person to the highest-ranking officials. The investigation into Officer Turner was no longer just a local matter. It had become a symbol, a rallying cry for those who had been silenced for too long. But with every action came a consequence. Jalen had been walking into a new chapter of his life, one that no longer felt safe. He wasn't a student anymore. He wasn't just a teenager living in Mayfield. He had become a symbol, a living representation of resistance. And with that came dangers he hadn't yet fully understood. The police, the system, the people who had always operated in the shadows, they were coming for him now, desperate to regain control. But Jalen wasn't afraid. The day the final piece of the puzzle was revealed, Jalen sat at Sarah's side, staring at the screen in front of him. She had called him in for an emergency meeting, and when he saw the new information she had uncovered, his heart sank. It was worse than they'd thought. Sarah clicked through the documents on her laptop. "We've got it," she said, her voice steady but laced with a hint of urgency. "This is a smoking gun. Evidence of systematic corruption inside the police department, going back years. It's not just Turner. The chief of police is involved. Several officers, even city officials. This isn't just about one bad apple. It's a whole orchard." Jalen stared at the screen, at the incriminating photos, the hidden records, the receipts that tied officers to legal activity, and the cash payments funneled into off-the-books accounts. The depth of the corruption was staggering. It wasn't just Turner. This was systemic. It was everything Jalen had suspected. But seeing it in black and white was like a punch to the gut. These were the people who had been controlling his life, the lives of his friends, his family, his entire community. "How do we expose this?" Jalen asked, his voice tight, holding the weight of everything they were about to unleash. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keys, pausing for a moment before she spoke. "We take it to the press. But it's not just about releasing documents. It's about connecting the dots. We got to show the people what they've been blind to for so long. This is bigger than just one officer. This is a pattern of behavior that's been hidden for decades." Jalen looked at the evidence again, the weight of it all sinking in. He had known, in his gut, that this was bigger than Turner. But now, seeing the full extent of corruption laid out before him, it felt like the world was collapsing around him. The risks were enormous. If they went public with this, they would be taking on the very institutions that had controlled Mayfield for so long, and he would be their target. But the choice was clear. "We're doing this," Jalen said, his voice firm, despite the shaking in his hands. "We expose it all. We can't let them keep getting away with it. No more." The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah, Jalen, and a small team of trusted allies worked late into the night, preparing the evidence. They crafted the story, piecing together each detail so that it couldn't be ignored. They knew the moment they hit send, there was no going back. The truth would be out there, and the system would have no choice but to confront it. At 3 a.m., Sarah hit the button. The story went live. The headline flashed across every news outlet. Corruption at the highest level. Mayfield Police Department under investigation for decades of misconduct. Jalen sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. It felt surreal, like they had just set off a bomb. His heart raced as the story began to spread, first locally, then nationally. It didn't take long before Turner's name was back in the news. But this time, it wasn't the only name on the list. It was just the beginning of a much larger investigation. The mayor's office issued a statement denying any involvement, but Jalen knew the truth was out. There was no covering it up now. The fallout came fast. The police department scrambled to contain the damage, issuing statements defending their integrity. They downplayed the significance of the evidence and promised a full investigation, but it was clear that the damage was done. The community, the people who had been waiting for something like this to happen, wasn't buying it. Protests erupted in the streets of Mayfield, people chanting for justice. The hashtag Justice for Jalen trended nationwide. And in the middle of it all, Jalen stood. His face was on every news station. His name was spoken with reverence by some, hatred by others. But through it all, he kept his head high. A few days after the story broke, Jalen received a call from the local district attorney. The voice on the other end of the line was official, cold. Jalen, I want to make it clear that we take these allegations seriously. The department is under investigation, and action will be taken. However, I need you to understand that this will not be an easy fight. There are powerful people involved. I suggest you be cautious in the days to come. Jalen felt a chill run down his spine as the DA spoke. He had known this was coming. The intimidation, the threats. They were trying to warn him, trying to make him back off. But Jalen wasn't backing down. He had started something, and now it was time to finish it. Thank you, Jalen said, his voice even. But I'm not afraid of them. The next morning, as Jalen stood at the front of his classroom, watching the protests outside his school continue, he realized something important. This wasn't just about one police officer. This wasn't just about Mayfield. This was bigger than that. This was about making sure that the next generation didn't have to fight the same battles. It was about the world seeing, finally, that people like him mattered. Jalen had exposed the truth, and in doing so, he had started a revolution. The system was broken, but now people were paying attention, and that, more than anything, was the victory. But he knew this was just the beginning. The days that followed the release of the story were a blur of emotions. Jalen's phone never stopped buzzing. Calls from reporters, messages from strangers, and notifications from friends who either offered their support or their condemnation. He had been thrust into a fight much bigger than he had ever imagined, but he wasn't backing down. The protests had grown bigger. More and more people were marching through the streets of Mayfield, demanding justice for those who had been silenced for so long. The video he had posted, his initial act of defiance, had ignited a fire that spread across the country. News outlets picked up the story, and politicians were forced to take a stand, though many of them did so with reluctance. The police department, meanwhile, tried to maintain its usual facade of authority. Officer Turner remained on administrative leave, but the other officers implicated in the scandal were still in the shadows. No arrests had been made yet, no concrete actions taken. The investigation was ongoing, but the delay only fueled public anger. Jalen could feel it, the weight of the world pressing against his chest. Everywhere he went, people stared at him. They whispered. They debated whether he was a hero or a troublemaker. He had become a symbol, a living representation of a fight that had been long overdue. But the burden of that symbol was heavier than he had ever imagined. One afternoon, after school, Jalen sat in the quiet of his bedroom, staring out the window. The protests continued outside, a constant reminder of the world that had been forever changed by his actions. His phone sat beside him, silent for the first time in days. For the first time, he allowed himself a moment of peace. His mother walked into the room, her footsteps soft on the carpet. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside him on the bed. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of distant voices from the protest outside filling quiet. Finally, she spoke. "You've made your mark, Jalen," she said, her voice gentle but filled with pride. "But you have to understand, this fight is never over. You exposed something ugly, but it's going to take more than just this moment to change anything." Jalen nodded slowly, staring at the small crowd of protesters visible through the window. He knew what she meant. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "I didn't think it would be easy," Jalen replied quietly, his voice a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "But I don't want to stop now. I can't. Not when people are finally seeing the truth." His mom's gaze softened. "You're strong, Jalen, but you have to be careful. The world doesn't work the way we wish it did. You're going to lose more before it gets better." Jalen swallowed, the weight of her words sinking deep. He had always known the cost of fighting, but hearing it from his mother, hearing the quiet resignation in her voice, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Then I'll keep fighting," Jalen said, his voice firm, though his heart fell heavy. "For everyone who's been ignored, for everyone who's had to face what I've faced. I can't let them win." His mother smiled softly, brushing a strand of his hair from his forehead. "Just remember, Jalen, you're never alone in this. You may feel like it, but you're not. There's a world of people out there who are watching and waiting for change, and they'll stand with you." The following weeks were filled with more uncertainty than Jalen had anticipated. The protests had become a permanent fixture in the streets of Mayfield, with people of all backgrounds coming together to demand justice. The investigation into the police department had made headlines, but the question of what would happen next hung in the air like a storm cloud. Jalen tried to focus on his schoolwork, but his mind was always somewhere else. He could hear the sirens in the distance, the echoes of his own anxiety. He was torn between the need to finish what he had started and the desire to hold on to a semblance of normalcy. Every decision he made felt like it carried the weight of the world. Then, one evening, Jalen received an unexpected message. It was from Marcus, his best friend. They hadn't spoken much in the weeks since the video went viral. There had been too much distance between them, too many unspoken words. "I saw the protest today." The message read, "I've been thinking about everything you've done. I was wrong to be scared. You were right. We can't be quiet anymore. I want to help." Jalen felt a mixture of relief and guilt flood through him as he read the message. Marcus had always been there for him, but this fight was different. It had tested their friendship in ways neither of them had anticipated. Still, the thought of having his friend back on his side meant more than Jalen could express. He quickly typed a response. "I'm glad you're with me. We've got a long road ahead. Let's do this together." The response was simple, but it was all he needed to hear. As the investigation continued, the pressure on the Mayfield Police Department intensified. The mayor's office, which had initially denied any connection to the scandal, was now being questioned by local news outlets and politicians. The public demand for answers was louder than ever, but despite the mounting pressure, the truth was slow to come to light. The wheels of justice turned painfully slowly. Jalen didn't stop. Every day, he shared the story with anyone who would listen. He posted updates, participated in protests, and worked with Sarah to expose the corruption that had been festering for so long. His voice became the voice of the people, even though it often felt like it was being drowned out by the noise of those trying to maintain the status quo. One evening, after a particularly tense protest, Jalen stood at the front of the crowd, his fists clenched at his sides. The protesters had gathered outside the mayor's office, chanting for accountability, for justice. Jalen could feel the weight of their collective anger, the sense of unity that had been missing for so long. It wasn't over yet, but they were getting closer. That night, as Jalen sat alone in his room, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but Jalen answered anyway. "Jalen," the voice on the other end said, familiar but calm. It was the district attorney, the one who had reached out to him early in the investigation. "I just wanted you to know," the DA continued, "that things are moving faster than expected. We've got enough to press charges. Turner, along with several others, are going to be held accountable." Jalen's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the final victory, but it was a step a significant one. You're not alone in this, Jalen, the DA added. We'll make sure justice is served. As Jalen hung up the phone, a sense of exhaustion washed over him, but so did a quiet satisfaction. He had started something, and now justice was within reach. The fight wasn't over. It never truly would be. But for the first time in a long time, Jalen felt like he could finally breathe. Jalen stood in front of the courthouse, the cold concrete beneath his feet, a reminder that the day had finally come. The day when the people responsible for the corruption in Mayfield would face their reckoning. The air was crisp and the sunlight was blindingly bright, cutting to the haze of nervous energy in the crowd. Jalen had been here before, standing in the shadow of something bigger than himself, but this time he wasn't afraid. The protests had escalated since the news had broken. The streets were alive with chants of justice for Jalen and no more corruption. The city, once quiet and complacent, had come alive with a fury Jalen had never known existed. But today was different. Today wasn't just about a fight for justice. It was about exposing a system that had spent years hiding in the shadows. Today was the day that everything could change. Jalen's fingers gripped the edges of the protest sign in his hand. The words truth, justice, accountability were emblazoned across it in bold black letters. The same message had been echoed countless times during the protests, but now it felt real. The court had convened, and the trial of Officer Turner, along with several others implicated in the scandal, was about to begin. I still can't believe it's come to this, Marcus said, stepping up beside Jalen. His face, usually so full of skepticism, was now filled with determination. His voice had softened over the past few weeks, no longer filled with doubt, but with a resolve that mirrored Jalen's own. The weight of their shared struggle was no longer a burden they carried alone. Believe it, Jalen said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. We did this. We've made them listen. But even as Jalen spoke, a chill crept through him. He had fought for this moment, worked tirelessly to bring it to this point. But the truth was, he had no idea how the system would react to the heat that was coming. Turner, the officers involved, even the mayor's office, they were all preparing for this trial. The political forces behind the corrupt practices would do whatever it took to protect their own. And while the victory of bringing them to court felt momentous, Jalen knew that exposing the truth didn't guarantee the kind of justice he was hoping for. Are you ready? Marcus asked, his eyes searching Jalen's face. I don't have a choice, Jalen replied, his voice steady. The moment he'd feared was now right in front of him. The spotlight on him was no longer just about his video or his voice. It was about the entire community's demand for justice. And it wasn't just the corrupt officers who were under scrutiny now. The entire system was being forced to reckon with its complicity. Inside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. Every seat was taken. The reporters, the onlookers, the families, and the politicians had gathered. But there were no guarantees. The court was packed with faces eager for a glimpse of the truth, yet every glance seemed shrouded in uncertainty. Jalen's family was there, sitting together in the front row. His mother's eyes, tired but proud, met his as he walked down the aisle. His heart swelled with gratitude. But there was something else, too. Something deeper, a silent understanding that even this trial wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The defense had been preparing for this moment. Jalen had heard rumors that their strategy would be to discredit him, to paint him as an agitator, a liar, that the video he'd posted was taken out of context, that his accusations were exaggerated. Turner's legal team would make every effort to demonize Jalen, to make him a villain in a story that had already been written by those in power. But Jalen wasn't alone anymore. The courtroom fell silent as the judge entered. Judge Barlow, a tall, stern man with a reputation for being fair but no nonsense, took his seat at the bench. The proceedings began with a formal reading of the charges. Jalen's heart raced as he heard the words: abuse of power, racism, conspiracy to conceal criminal activity, all of them aimed squarely at Turner and the officers involved. As the first witness was called to the stand, a wave of anxiety washed over Jalen. He didn't know what to expect. He didn't know how things would unfold. The evidence Sarah had uncovered, the video he had recorded, it was all out there now. But would it be enough? Then came the moment he had been waiting for, his turn to speak. Jalen had prepared himself for this day. He had thought through every word, every emotion. But standing before the judge, the prosecutors, the defense, and an entire room of people waiting to hear his story, his resolve wavered for just a moment. It wasn't fear, though. It was the weight of the truth. As Jalen stepped up to the witness stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. His pulse raced, but his voice was steady. The moment wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had suffered in silence. It was about his community. "I was just walking home," Jalen began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of every word. "I've been stopped by cops my whole life. But that day, it wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about one officer harassing me. It was about the system that allowed it to happen over and over again with no consequences. You don't realize it at first. It's just a part of your life. But when you start to see it for what it is, when you see the pattern, you can't unsee it." His words carried through the courtroom, cutting through the silence. As he spoke, he could feel the eyes of everyone on him. But for the first time, he didn't feel the weight of their judgment. He felt the weight of something else. Purpose. The defense attorney tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "I've been treated like I don't belong in this city, in this country," Jalen continued, his voice breaking slightly but strong. "But I do, and I'm not backing down. Not for me, not for anyone." When Jalen stepped down from the stand, he felt a strange calm wash over him. It wasn't over. Not yet, but he had done what he needed to do. He had told his truth, and the truth had a way of working its way through the cracks of even the most fortified systems. The trial continued, each piece of evidence stacking up against the officers involved. Turner, now visibly shaken, sat in the defendant's chair, tried to maintain the bravado that had once made him feel invincible. But it was clear his time was running out, and the system that had protected him for so long was finally beginning to crumble. As the trial progressed, the prosecutor called witness after witness, each one confirming the truth of Jalen's testimony. Officers who had once stood by Turner began to speak out, their testimonies revealing corruption that had been allowed to flourish under the guise of law enforcement. By the end of the day, the judge adjourned the court for the night. The next day would bring closing statements. But Jalen didn't need to hear them to know what was coming. This battle, the one that had begun with a simple act of resistance, was nearing its end. And even though Jalen couldn't predict the future, he knew one thing. No matter what happened next, he had sparked something that could never be extinguished.